Hi, my name is Jack Wallen, and I'm here again with another Linux 101. And this time we're going to answer the question, what is a Linux distribution? Now, this is a really important question to answer, especially for those who are new to Linux or have never used Linux or even heard of Linux. Now, if you don't know what Linux is, I would suggest you go back and watch my video Linux 101, What is Linux? I can't even remember what the title of it was, but it's there. But this is the question of the day. What is a Linux distribution? Now, I'm going to answer that question first by talking about shoes. What do shoes have to do with Linux or an operating system or computers at all? I mean, yes, you can order shoes with your computer, but that's not what we're talking about. Shoes, running shoes. Let's talk about running shoes. When you think about running shoes, what do you think of? Probably think of brands. You probably think of Saucony, Brooks, Asics, Hoka. The list goes on and on and on and on. There are so many different brands of running shoes. Now, here's the thing. Each one of those brands has different models, right? Each one of those models of shoes does the same thing. You put them on your feet and you go run. Or you go walk, whatever it is you do. But they do the same thing. They're just variations on a theme. Some of them might have a higher heel-to-toe drop. Some of them may be for supinators. Some may be for overpronators. There's all sorts of variations on that theme, but they all do the same thing. Now, let's talk about Linux distributions. Linux is an operating system. Let's think of the distributions as brands. Okay? Each brand does the same thing. They serve as either your desktop operating system or your server operating system. Same thing. And many of them do it the same way. But there are, just like shoes, there are an inordinate number of distributions for which to choose. And that is often one of the first problems that users run against. Which choice to make? Because the choice just doesn't just end at distribution. Because some distributions offer variations on their own theme. They might have this distribution X might have versions with GNOME, with KDE, Plasma, with XFCE. Those are desktop environments. Some of them even offer multiple kernels from which to choose. The choices just keep going, getting bigger and bigger and better, and sometimes a little bit more confusing. But here's the thing. There are specific Linux distributions that are really good for new users. And there are specific Linux distributions that are really not good for new users. Now, I'm going to do something. I tried to do this the other day with a different video of mine. I tried to rattle off different Rush songs that start with letters of the alphabet, going through the entire alphabet. I'm going to do that with Linux distributions, okay? So please be patient with me. Hopefully I can get through this quickly. There is Alma Linux, Bodhi, CentOS, Debian, Fedora, ABCFG, Gentoo, Haiku, iLinux, Jolly OS, Kubuntu, Linux Mint, Manjaro, Nobara, N-O, Oracle Linux, P, Peppermint Linux, PQ, Cubes, R, Red Hat, S, Slackware, T, Tails, TU, Ubuntu, V, Void Linux, X, Xubuntu, Y, Yellow Dog Linux, Z, Zorin OS. Now here's the thing. That's not all of them. There are some letters of the alphabet with multiple Linux distributions. I cannot even tell you how many in total Linux distributions there are. Hundreds of them. Some of them are so obscure that I don't even know about them. And I've been using Linux for almost 30 years. And I write about Linux. So you see, distributions can be kind of overwhelming. So many choices. So how do you choose? Well, if you're a new user, I would say you should limit your choice to probably 5 distributions. Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Zorin OS, Elementary, and Deepin. Those are the 5 distributions I would say that any person, regardless of how much skill you have with a computer, can use. You could jump into those distributions and feel right at home. Now, even among those 5, there are distributions that are probably even better suited for new users. Linux Mint. The thing about Linux Mint is that you could log into Linux Mint and immediately know how to use it. The UI, the desktop interface, or the desktop environment is laid out very much like what you're used to. It's very much kind of a Windows-esque operating system. It has a panel, it has a start menu, it has clickable icons, it has a system tray. You know all of those things, right? And next in line would be Zorin OS. And one of the beautiful things about Zorin OS is the free version. There's 2 versions, a free and a paid version. The free version comes with 4 different desktop layouts. There is a classic Windows layout, there's a GNOME layout, there is another Linux layout, or another Windows layout, and then there's something, I can't remember what the last one is. And then the Pro version has 6 more desktop layouts. There's a Mac OS layout, there's a KDE layout, KDE Plasma that is. So even within that one distribution, you have a lot of choices. But the good thing is you could just choose the interface that you're used to, like the classic Windows interface, and you're good to go. Now, if you go with Ubuntu, there's just the slightest little bit of learning curve, but the second you log in, you're going to go, okay, I get it. There's a panel on the side, and there's icons I can click, and there's this little icon with the little square of dots, and if I click on that, then I can see what's called the application overview, where I can see all my installed applications, and I can click there, or I can right-click one of the favorite or the application icons and click Add to Favorites, and it'll add it to the dock and or the panel and whatever. So even with the distributions in that 5 that might have a slight learning curve, they're still incredibly easy to learn. And I didn't even touch on Elementary OS, which is yet another outstanding distribution that's good for new users. Elementary OS is very much laid out like a Mac OS desktop. It has a dock and it has a top bar. And on the top bar in the top left corner, it has a menu button. You click on the menu button, the menu expands, and you can click find all your applications. So if you are a new user and you choose the wrong distribution to try it first, it's going to be problematic. If you decided, I'm going to go with Arch Linux as my first Linux distribution, that relationship's probably going to last a couple hours because you're going to get really frustrated with the installation. The installation of Arch Linux is really complicated. And that pales in comparison to the installation of Gentoo Linux, which is incredibly difficult. It's important, if you want to have a long-term relationship with Linux, that you start off on the right foot, on the right distribution, with the right running shoe on. If you do that, you will have a long-term relationship with Linux. If you jump into those Linux waters and say, hey, I like the looks of that Gentoo icon, you're going to struggle. And that that relationship you have with Linux is not going to last very long. Now, here's the thing. It's not just the distribution selection. There's also the desktop environment selection. Now, I'm going to talk about desktop environments later, but there are a lot of desktop environments to choose from. The good thing is if you select the right distribution at first, you will have selected a user-friendly distribution that has a desktop environment that is immediately familiar to you. Right? And it will include the applications you need, the means to install applications via a GUI. That's right. Most modern Linux distributions have a GUI app store. So if the distribution Elementary OS is a good example. Elementary OS installs with very few applications. But if you go to what's called the App Center, you can install a host of applications. LibreOffice, GIMP, Spotify, Slack, anything you need. And if you go with Ubuntu, you'll get your Office suite installed by default. And there are some Linux distributions that during the installation will say, hey, you want to use LibreOffice? You want to use WP Office? You want to use only Office desktop editors? What would you like for your Office suite? So many Linux distributions give you even more choice. So the smart thing to do is choose a Linux distribution that's going to slightly limit that choice at first. Because once you get used to that Linux distribution that you've chosen at first, you'll be able to then do what many Linux users do eventually, which is called distro hopping. I have done it. I'm guilty of it. I have distro hopped many a times. I started out my Linux career with Caldera Open Linux 1. I quickly went to Red Hat Linux before Red Hat kind of split into Red Hat and Fedora. And then I went to, I think I stuck with Red Hat for a while, but I installed different desktop environments. One of them was AfterStep, which was super cool, and then Enlightenment, and then eventually I migrated to Ubuntu, and then I did a departure to Bodhi Linux, and then I went to Elementary OS, and then I went back to Ubuntu, and then I went to Pop OS, and then I went to Ubuntu Budgie, and then I went back to Pop OS, and that's where I am right now. And of course there were other distributions peppered in there. I've used a lot of them. I've tested and reviewed most of them. And trust me, that's taken me a long time. But it's just so important that you select the right distribution first, and that you do not become overwhelmed with the amount of choice that's available. And that's why I say you should limit your first choice to one of those 5 Linux distributions. Now, you could probably swap Elementary OS for Deepin. Deepin has had a kind of a bad reputation because for a while everybody thought Deepin was kind of Chinese malware. And I believe that that's pretty much been debunked, but that doesn't matter. So, when you start your journey with the Linux operating system, you're going to see a lot of choice. Don't get overwhelmed. Take my advice, stick with one of those 5 distributions, and if I'm being honest, if I'm being perfectly honest, among those 5 distributions, I would say that probably either Linux Mint, Elementary OS, or Zorin OS. Why? Because those distributions offer a desktop environment that's going to be immediately familiar to you. There's going to be 0 learning curve for the desktop, right? Because if you went with, say, Fedora is a really good distribution. It's really fast, it's really stable, but the default version of Fedora has the GNOME desktop environment. Now, GNOME is easy to use, but it's very different than what you're used to. Now, let's go back to Fedora for a second. Fedora has what's called spins. And there are other distributions that have spins. A spin is basically a variation of that distribution. And those spins, typically, the only difference is really the desktop environment that they offer. So with Fedora, there's a KDE Plasma spin, there's an XFCE spin, there's a new Cosmic spin coming, all sorts of spins for Fedora, and all of them offer different desktop environments. The desktop environments you should think about as a new user are as follows: KDE Plasma, Cinnamon, Mate, maybe Deepin Desktop. But those are the desktops that I would suggest, that I would recommend to new users. So if you want Cinnamon, it's Linux Mint. If you want KDE Plasma, you can go with Kubuntu, which is Ubuntu with KDE Plasma. There's actually a lot of different Ubuntu flavors. There's Xubuntu, there's Edubuntu, there's Wubuntu, there's Ubuntu Budgie. Each of those have a different desktop, with the exception of Edubuntu, which is a Ubuntu spin dedicated to education. So don't let the choices overwhelm you. It's just like shoes. They're all going to serve the same purpose. But probably one brand of those shoes is going to fit you best. So if you try one of those Linux distributions that I suggested and you don't like it, try a different one. If you go through all 5 of those distributions and you can't find one that you like or one that you can use, then maybe Linux isn't for you. But chances are pretty good it is, because it's secure, it's reliable, it's free, and it's fast. It's a great operating system. I've been using it for almost 30 years, and I have no regrets. Anyway, that, my friends, is what a Linux distribution is. It's really that simple, for the most part. Anyway, thank you so very much for giving me a little bit of your time today to explain to you what a Linux distribution is. The next time around, I'm probably going to talk about Linux desktop environments. So I've touched on that now, but we'll go in a little bit more in depth the next time. I hope that I have helped you, maybe entertained you, I don't know. If you know somebody that could benefit from this video, share it with them. Because sharing is caring. Thank you again, and I hope that everyone you know and love have a wonderful, wonderful day.